Hello everyone, and welcome. Before I share this story with you today, let me ask you something. Have you ever given everything you had to someone, only to discover they were waiting for you to die? I am Richard Caldwell. I am 70 years old now, and until that freezing Tuesday morning in November, I actually believed I had a family who loved me. What I am about to tell you is the story of how my own son and daughter-in-law tried to steal my entire life's work. It is the story of how they planned to chemically destroy my mind, lock me away in a state-funded nursing home, and disappear with my millions. But most importantly, it is the story of how I fought back. I woke up in the intensive recovery ward of Seattle General Hospital. The steady rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound greeting me. My chest felt like it had been split open with a wedge and stitched back together with barbed wire. Considering the triple coronary bypass surgery I had just endured, that was not far from the truth. The anesthesia was slowly wearing off, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog in my brain. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, turning my head slowly to the right. I expected to see Bradley sitting in the visitor chair. I expected to see Monica flipping through a magazine, waiting for me to wake up. I expected at the very least a vase of cheap hospital gift shop flowers or a card. But the chair was empty. The room was perfectly, brutally still. I was completely alone. I pressed the call button. A young nurse walked in, checking my vitals with a sympathetic smile. She told me the surgery was a complete success. A miracle for a man my age. She told me I was recovering so rapidly that the head surgeon had authorized an early discharge. I asked her with a throat as dry as sandpaper if my son had stepped out to get coffee. The nurse looked down, avoiding my eyes. She softly told me that no one had been in the waiting room since the surgery began yesterday morning. No one had called the front desk to check on my status either. A cold knot formed in my stomach, distinct from the surgical pain. It was the sharp, unmistakable ache of abandonment. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My hands were shaking, trembling from the aftermath of the anesthesia and the sudden rush of adrenaline. I opened the family group chat. I typed out a message, keeping it light, giving them the benefit of the doubt. I wrote, "Surgery went perfectly. The doctor is discharging me early. Can anyone come pick me up?" I watched the screen. 3 gray dots appeared. Bradley was typing. I felt a brief wave of relief. He was probably just caught up with work. He was 35 years old, a grown man. Surely he was just managing the business while I was incapacitated. Then the message popped up on the screen. "Call a taxi. I am watching the game." I stared at the glowing letters. I read the sentence 3 times, my brain refusing to process the sheer callousness of the words. I had just had my chest cavity sawed open. I was highly medicated, weak, and vulnerable. And my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had given everything to, was telling me to take a cab because a football game was on television. Before the shock could settle into anger, the screen buzzed again. It was Monica, my daughter-in-law. "Stay longer," her text read. "It is nice without you here." I stopped breathing for a second. The words hit me harder than the surgeon's scalpel. There was no laughing emoji. There was no follow-up text saying they were just kidding. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. They were annoyed by my existence. They viewed my survival as an inconvenience to their relaxing afternoon. I set the phone down on the sterile mattress. I did not cry. Crying is a luxury for people who still have hope. Instead, a deep, glacial numbness spread through my veins. It froze the remaining affection I had left for them. I slowly pushed the thin hospital blanket off my legs. Every slight movement sent agonizing shock waves across my sternum. I reached for the thick medical tape securing the intravenous tubes to my forearm. I did not call the nurse. I simply gritted my teeth and ripped the tape off my bruised skin in one swift motion. A drop of blood welled up, but I ignored it. I pulled the heart monitor patches off my chest, silencing the machine's warning alarms by ripping the cords out of the wall socket. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My bare feet touched the cold linoleum floor. I stood up, gripping the edge of the mattress to steady my trembling knees. As I pulled my civilian clothes from the plastic hospital belongings bag, buttoning my shirt with slow, agonizing effort, my mind began to replay the last 40 years of my life. I did not inherit a single dime. I spent 4 decades bleeding, sweating, and sacrificing every weekend to build a commercial logistics firm from a single leaky warehouse in South Seattle into a multi-million-dollar empire. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I worked myself into the ground, leading directly to the failing heart in my chest. Also, my family would never know the bitter taste of poverty. Just 3 years ago, I handed them the keys to a $2.5 million estate in the most exclusive suburb of the city. I paid the down payment in cash. I covered their lavish lifestyle, their luxury cars, their endless vacations. I moved into the guest room of that very house so I could be closer to them, believing the lie that we were a tight-knit family. I had given them a kingdom, and they were annoyed that the king had not died on the operating table. I slipped my arms into my coat, feeling a heavy, quiet transformation taking place inside me. I was no longer an old, tired father hoping for crumbs of affection from an ungrateful son. The fog of the medication completely vanished, replaced by the razor-sharp clarity of a corporate survivor. If they wanted to treat me like a disposable nuisance, I was going to show them exactly what happens when the man who funds their entire reality stops playing nice. I walked out of the hospital room, ignoring the protests of the nursing staff in the hallway. I signed the discharge papers with a steady hand. I pushed through the sliding glass doors into the biting, damp air of the Seattle afternoon. I did not call Bradley back. I did not beg. I stepped off the curb and hailed a passing yellow cab. I gave the driver the address to the sprawling estate I had paid for. I leaned my head against the cold leather of the back seat, watching the gray city blur past the rain-streaked window. My chest throbbed with a dull, heavy ache, a constant reminder of the mortality I had just narrowly escaped. The taximeter clicked rhythmically, a sharp mechanical sound that mirrored the cold calculations now forming in my brain. I thought they were just lazy. I thought they were just selfish, spoiled children who lacked empathy because I had shielded them from the harsh realities of the world. I had no idea that their cruel text messages were only the absolute tip of the iceberg. I was going home to recover in my own bed, completely unaware that I was walking straight into a meticulously planned trap. A trap designed by my own blood to strip me of my life's work, my freedom, and my sanity. The war had already started, and I was about to walk right through the front door. The taxi ride from Seattle General Hospital to the sprawling wealthy suburbs of Bellevue was 45 minutes of absolute physical and psychological agony. Every time the worn suspension of the cab hit a pothole or navigated a sharp turn, a searing white-hot spike of pain radiated outward from my stapled sternum. I kept my right hand pressed firmly against my chest, feeling the thick gauze beneath my damp shirt, applying steady counter pressure to keep myself from crying out. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, kept glancing at me nervously in the rearview mirror. He asked me twice if I needed him to pull over or head back to the hospital. I shook my head, avoiding his gaze, and told him to keep driving. The physical pain, as excruciating as it was, paled in comparison to the chilling realization settling over my mind. I stared out the foggy window, watching the towering glass and steel skyscrapers of my city give way to the heavily wooded neighborhoods of the elite. For 40 hard years, I had successfully navigated brutal corporate warfare. I had dealt with ruthless competitors, survived hostile takeovers, and won vicious boardroom brawls against the best lawyers in the state. But I had never in all my decades of business faced an enemy who shared my DNA. My own son. I thought about the text message again. Call a taxi. I am watching the game. It repeated in my head over and over like a cruel rhythmic chant, matching the mechanical ticking of the meter. I had sacrificed my health, my youth, and my marriage to secure his future, and he could not spare 30 minutes to drive me home from a procedure. When the cab pulled off the main road and approached the towering wrought iron gates of the estate, I leaned forward and tapped the partition. I told the driver to stop right there on the shoulder. I handed him a $50 bill and stepped out into the biting November chill without waiting for change. The freezing cold air hit my flushed face like a physical blow, instantly freezing the light layer of sweat that had gathered on my forehead. I stood there gripping the freezing iron bars of the pedestrian gate, gathering the physical strength to push it open. The driveway was long, paved with imported gray cobblestone that I had paid a small fortune to install 3 years ago. Flanking the winding drive were manicured privacy hedges and tall oak trees that cast long distorted shadows in the fading afternoon light. Walking up that slight incline was the hardest physical task I had ever undertaken in my entire 70 years of living. My breath plumed in the freezing air in short, ragged gasps. My legs felt like solid blocks of lead, trembling violently under the sheer weight of my medical exhaustion. Every step forward required a demanding command from my brain to my muscles. Yet with every agonizing step I took on that stone, the warm fog of a loving, forgiving father burned away. I was rapidly shifting back into the ruthless, calculating man who built Caldwell Logistics from nothing. I slowly approached the massive custom-built house. The automated exterior lighting had already clicked on, bathing the grand facade in a warm, welcoming glow. It was a literal fortress of luxury, a fortress I had fully funded. I did not walk toward the heavy oak front door. My instincts, honed by decades of dealing with corporate liars, guided me off the paved path and onto the soft grass of the front lawn. I moved silently, my expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the turf. I made my way toward the massive floor-to-ceiling structural glass windows that wrapped around the formal living room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn wide open, putting the interior of the brightly lit room on display like a glowing diorama. I stopped just short of the glass, pressing my back against a thick stone pillar to keep myself hidden in the gathering darkness. I held my breath, fighting the burning sensation in my lungs, and peered inside. The very first thing my eyes locked onto was the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the marble fireplace. The screen was completely, undeniably black. It was dead silent. There was no football game playing. There was no sports broadcast. There was absolutely nothing. Bradley had looked at a message from his father, a man who had just survived open heart surgery, and casually fabricated a lie simply because he did not want to be bothered. The sheer casualness of the deception made my blood run completely cold, but the extinguished television was only the beginning of the horror unfolding in my living room. I shifted my gaze slightly to the left, looking toward the sprawling formal dining area. Sitting at the mahogany dining table were Bradley and Monica. They were not relaxing on a lazy Sunday afternoon. They were leaning forward, engaged in a high-stakes meeting. Sitting directly across from them was a man I had never seen before. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit and a conservative silk tie. His briefcase, made of thick leather, was open on the floor beside him. He did not look like a friend. He did not look like a neighbor. He possessed the unmistakable posture of a corporate attorney or a specialized asset liquidator. Resting in the center of the table was a silver ice bucket. Nestled inside it was a bottle of Dom Perignon. My vintage Dom Perignon, a bottle I had saved to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of my company going public. They were drinking my champagne out of crystal flutes. Monica was smiling a wide, triumphant smile that I had never seen her direct toward me. But the table itself made my damaged heart hammer against my ribs, triggering a terrifying spike in my blood pressure. Spread out across the polished wood were thick stacks of legal documents. There were colored sticky flags protruding from dozens of pages, marking places for signatures. The stranger in the suit was pointing to a specific paragraph with a silver pen, explaining something to Bradley. Bradley nodded eagerly, took the pen, and signed his name at the bottom of the page. He then slid the packet over to Monica, who excitedly added her signature right next to his. I stood outside in the freezing rain, my chest burning, watching my son and his wife execute a coordinated legal maneuver in the secrecy of my own home. They had told me to stay at the hospital. They had told me to call a taxi. They wanted me isolated and medically incapacitated. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with terrifying clarity. This was not a casual Sunday gathering. This was a highly orchestrated legal ambush. What exactly were they signing the day after my open heart surgery? What were they stealing while they thought I was safely trapped in a hospital bed? I closed my eyes, took a painful breath of icy air, and prepared to step out of the shadows. I pushed the heavy oak front door open. It swung inward with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous foyer. For a fraction of a second, before their brains could fully process the reality of my physical presence standing there, the tableau in the dining room remained perfectly still. Then, sheer panic erupted. It was not the kind of startle you see when someone is simply surprised by an unexpected guest arriving early. It was the frantic, messy panic of thieves caught with their hands inside a vault. Bradley physically jumped backward, his elbow knocking against his crystal flute and sending a splash of champagne across the wood. The silver pen slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering against the mahogany surface before rolling off the edge and dropping onto the expensive Persian rug. Monica reacted with a terrifying predatory swiftness that I had never seen her display. She threw her upper body across the table, spreading her arms wide to drape her blouse over the stacks of legally bound paper. She knocked over a stack of colored sticky flags in her haste, sending a cascade of markers fluttering to the floor. The stranger in the tailored charcoal suit froze completely, his hand hovering midair over his open leather briefcase, his eyes wide and locked onto my pale, bruised face. I stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the doorframe for support, my breathing intentionally shallow and labored. I let my shoulders slump forward, amplifying the intense physical toll the major surgery had taken on my body. I needed them to see exactly what they expected to see in that moment. A frail, broken, heavily medicated old man who posed zero threat to their grand ambitions. Bradley was the first to recover his voice. He kicked the fallen silver pan under the table with his heel and sprinted across the foyer toward me. He reached out, grabbing me by the shoulders with an aggressive, suffocating grip that he desperately tried to pass off as filial concern. "Dad," he practically shouted, his voice pitching an octave higher than normal, echoing off the high ceilings. "What are you doing here? Why did you not tell us you were taking a cab from the hospital? We would have paused the football game and come to get you immediately. We thought you were staying in the cardiac ward until tomorrow morning." I looked at him. I looked at the dark television screen behind him, reflecting only the ambient light of the room. And then I looked deeply into my son's eyes. They were incredibly wide, darting frantically between my tired face and the dining room table, where Monica was hastily shoving thick documents into large manila envelopes. His grip on my shoulders was tight enough to bruise my skin, clearly meant to physically restrain me from walking any further into the room. I let out a low, ragged cough, intentionally exaggerating the rattling sound deep in my chest. I felt perfectly clear-headed, the cold reality sharpening my senses, but I allowed my eyes to unfocus, staring blankly past him toward the stranger. The stranger had now stood up hastily, buttoning his suit jacket with nervous, jerky movements. He looked distinctly uncomfortable, exactly like a man who knew he was treading on highly illegal ground and had just been spotted by the rightful property owner. I pointed a trembling, bruised finger toward the dining table, my hand shaking violently, as if the mere effort of lifting my arm was simply too much physical burden to bear. "Who is that man?" I mumbled, slurring my syllables slightly, letting my jaw hang slack to complete the illusion of heavy sedation. "What exactly is happening here today?" Before Bradley could stumble through a fabricated excuse, Monica was immediately at his side. She had managed to sweep the bulk of the incriminating papers into the stranger's briefcase and was now wearing a mask of sickeningly sweet artificial devotion. She wrapped her arm tightly around my waist, her expensive floral perfume suddenly overwhelming to my compromised senses. "Oh, Richard, you gave us such a terrible fright," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth and exaggerated relief. "You should be in a hospital bed resting right now. To answer your question, this gentleman is an independent insurance adjuster. We wanted to surprise you. We know how much you absolutely hate dealing with tedious medical paperwork, so Bradley and I took the initiative to upgrade your post-operative care coverage. We were just signing the preliminary quotes to make sure you have the absolute best 24-hour nursing care moving forward. We did not want you to worry about a single financial detail while you recover at home." I listened to her smooth, highly practiced lie. It was a brilliant piece of improvisation, delivered with the kind of flawless, unblinking conviction that only a true remorseless sociopath could effectively muster under pressure. If I were truly the confused, heavily sedated old fool they believed me to be, I might have wept with sheer gratitude at my daughter-in-law's supposed dedication. But I was Richard Caldwell. I had spent my entire adult life negotiating complex multi-million-dollar international logistics contracts. I knew exactly what preliminary health insurance quotes looked like. They were never hundreds of pages thick. They never possessed heavy blue legal bindings. They did not require the presence of specialized corporate liquidators, and they certainly did not require my son and his wife to rapidly sign off on a dozen different color-coded sticky flags while celebrating with a bottle of vintage champagne on ice. I allowed my head to loll dramatically to the side, leaning my dead weight entirely against Bradley's side. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, closing my eyes firmly, as if the mental exertion of attempting to understand her words was simply too much for my weakened brain to process. "Insurance," I whispered weakly, letting my voice trail off into a pathetic rasp. "That is very thoughtful of you, Monica. I am just so incredibly tired right now. Everything hurts so much. I cannot even think straight. My chest feels like it is completely on fire." Bradley eagerly seized upon my theatrical performance. "Of course you are tired, Dad," he said quickly, guiding me firmly away from the dining room area and pushing me toward the long hallway leading to the guest suite. "You just survived major open heart surgery. You need absolute quiet and rest. Let us get you into bed right this second. We will handle all of this boring adult stuff out here. You do not need to stress your recovering heart with any of these tedious administrative details." I shuffled my feet heavily, dragging the rubber soles of my shoes against the hardwood floor to make myself appear even more physically helpless and dependent on his support. As we slowly made our agonizing way down the hall, I kept my eyes half shut, projecting the complete image of total cognitive surrender. Internally, however, a profound icy rage was rapidly hardening every single fiber of my being. They were smiling at each other over my drooping head. I could practically sense their immense radiating relief. They genuinely believed their ridiculous insurance narrative had worked perfectly. They believed I was far too drugged, far too physically weak, and far too trusting to actively question the blatant irregularities taking place in my own home. Behind us, I heard the stranger softly clear his throat. He spoke in a hushed, urgent, and highly professional tone. "I will leave the finalized transfer packets with you, Bradley. Please ensure the remaining proxy signatures are completed by tomorrow morning so we can properly execute the swift transfer before the weekend banking freeze. Have a good evening, Mr. Caldwell. I wish you a speedy recovery." The heavy front door clicked shut. Transfer packets. Execute the swift transfer. The specific corporate terminology echoed loudly in my mind, absolutely confirming my absolute worst suspicions. This was an active ongoing asset transfer, a massive illegal liquidation. Bradley guided me gently into the guest bedroom, a room that felt increasingly less like a sanctuary and significantly more like a carefully prepared holding cell. The heavy wooden door closed behind us, muting the sounds of the dining room, where the stranger still waited with those cursed transfer packets. Monica immediately pulled the thick blackout curtains tightly shut, plunging the room into an artificial twilight. She fluffed the pillows on the bed with frantic, exaggerated movements, her floral perfume still clinging to the stagnant air of the room. "You need absolute isolation and rest right now, Richard," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical, soothing whisper. "The doctors were very clear about minimizing your stress levels. Any sudden shocks or loud noises could trigger a fatal cardiac event. We cannot risk losing you." Bradley helped me lower my aching body onto the edge of the mattress. My chest throbbed with every shallow breath, but I maintained my facade of helpless exhaustion. I let my shoulders slump, staring blankly at the floor. "Here, Dad, let me help you out of that heavy coat," Bradley said smoothly. He slipped the tailored wool overcoat off my shoulders with practiced ease. He folded it neatly over his arm, stepping back toward the door. "We will let you sleep," he added, his tone brimming with that same manufactured filial piety. "Do not worry about a single thing. We have everything completely under control out there. Just focus on healing." I nodded weakly, letting my chin rest heavily against my chest. Monica offered me a warm, patronizing smile, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. It was a gesture so profoundly fake it made my stomach churn. "Sleep well, Richard," she whispered. "We will check on you in the morning." They backed out of the room together. The heavy oak door swung shut. I waited for the familiar soft click of the latch catching in the frame, but instead I heard a different sound. It was a sharp, distinct metallic scraping noise. A sound I had never heard coming from this particular door before. It was the undeniable sound of a deadbolt turning from the outside. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the bed for a long time. The silence in the darkened room was absolute, broken only by the ragged, uneven sound of my own breathing. My mind processed the metallic click over and over again. I slowly pushed myself up from the mattress, ignoring the searing pain radiating from my stapled sternum. I walked over to the heavy oak door. I placed my trembling hand on the brass handle and turned it downward. The handle rotated freely, but the door itself did not budge a single inch. I pushed my shoulder against the wood, applying as much physical pressure as my wounded chest could tolerate. The frame held firm. They had locked me inside. A cold wave of realization washed over me, chilling me down to the marrow of my bones. I was a prisoner in the very house I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I turned my back to the locked door and surveyed the dim room. The shadows seemed to stretch and distort across the walls, mocking my vulnerable state. I needed to assess my situation. I needed to know exactly how far their deception reached. I moved toward the small reading chair in the corner where Bradley had draped my wool overcoat before changing his mind and taking it with him. He had taken the coat, yes, but he had left my suit jacket draped over the back of the chair. I reached into the breast pocket of the jacket, searching for my thick leather wallet. My fingers met only empty fabric. I checked the inside and side pockets. Nothing. My wallet, containing my credit cards, my corporate identification, my driver's license, and a significant amount of cash, was completely gone. My breathing quickened, a dangerous spike of adrenaline flooding my compromised cardiovascular system. I patted the pockets of my dress trousers, desperately searching for my heavy ring of keys, the keys to the house, my car, and my corporate logistics headquarters. They were missing as well. Bradley had not just taken my overcoat to hang it in the hallway closet. He had methodically stripped me of my financial resources, my legal identification, and my physical mobility. I had been completely neutralized. I slowly walked back to the bed and lay down on the mattress, staring up at the dark ceiling. The physical pain in my chest was now completely eclipsed by the profound psychological agony of the betrayal. I lay there in the suffocating darkness, listening intently to the muffled sounds filtering through the floorboards and the thick walls of the sprawling estate. I could hear the faint rhythmic clinking of glassware coming from the dining room above. I could hear the low, urgent murmur of voices discussing clauses, signatures, and wire transfers. They were finalizing the theft of my life's work while I lay locked in a gilded cage just a few rooms away. They believed I was safely out of the way. They genuinely thought that by locking a wooden door and removing my wallet, they had effectively dismantled Richard Caldwell. They looked at my 70 years of age, my gray hair, and my fresh surgical wounds, and they saw only weakness. They saw an obsolete obstacle that could easily be swept aside and locked in a dark room until it was time to dispose of me permanently. But they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the man they were attempting to destroy. I did not build an empire by surrendering to adversity. I had spent decades analyzing market vulnerabilities and crushing competitors. My son and his wife had the element of surprise, and they currently possessed the physical high ground. But I possessed something far more dangerous. I possessed the absolute ruthless clarity of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose regarding his familial attachments. I closed my eyes, focusing entirely on regulating my erratic heartbeat. I breathed in deeply through my nose and exhaled slowly through my mouth, forcing my racing pulse to steady. Panic was a useless emotion. Fear was a distraction I could no longer afford. I had to approach this betrayal not as a heartbroken father mourning the loss of his son, but as a seasoned chief executive officer dismantling a hostile corporate takeover. This bedroom was no longer a place of rest. It was my strategic command center. I lay in the dark, gathering every ounce of my remaining physical and mental strength. I listened to the muffled laughter upstairs, letting their cruel, triumphant joy fuel my resolve. I had to fight a brutal, unforgiving war from a sick bed, armed with nothing but my intellect and my fading physical endurance. I did not yet know exactly how I would break out of this locked room. I did not know how I would reclaim my stolen company or exact my retribution. But as the silent cold night stretched on, one absolute certainty crystallized in my mind. Bradley and Monica were going to deeply regret the day they decided to declare war on a man who had spent his entire life learning exactly how to destroy his enemies. I awoke to the soft, muted light of dawn creeping through the gaps in the heavy blackout curtains. My chest felt tight, the staples pulling at my skin with every breath, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. I lay perfectly still beneath the covers, listening to the subtle sounds of the house waking up around me. I heard the faint hum of the expensive espresso machine I had purchased for them last Christmas. I heard the low, hushed tones of Bradley and Monica conversing in the kitchen. They were speaking in rapid, urgent whispers, a stark contrast to their usual loud, careless morning routines. I remained motionless, conserving my physical strength, waiting for them to make the first move. At precisely 8 a.m., the metallic grind of the deadbolt sliding open echoed through the quiet hallway. The brass handle turned and the door swung inward. Monica stepped into the room, balancing a silver tray with a bowl of oatmeal, a glass of orange juice, and a small plastic cup containing my morning medication. She had arranged her features into a mask of overwhelming, sickeningly sweet concern. "Good morning, Richard," she chirped, her voice dripping with an artificial brightness that immediately set my nerves on edge. "How did you sleep? We wanted to let you rest as long as possible after the excitement of yesterday evening." I forced my eyes to flutter open slowly, letting out a prolonged theatrical groan as I shifted my weight against the pillows. "I slept very heavily," I whispered, keeping my vocal cords relaxed to produce a raspy, frail sound. "My chest still hurts quite a bit." Monica smiled, placing the tray gently on the nightstand beside my bed. "That is completely normal after such a massive procedure," she reassured me, patting my shoulder with a patronizing touch. "The doctor said you need to stay in bed and avoid any unnecessary movement. I brought you some breakfast and your pills. These will help manage the pain and keep your heart rate steady." Before she could hand me the plastic cup, her mobile phone buzzed loudly in the pocket of her silk robe. She pulled it out, her eyes darting to the screen. A flash of genuine panic crossed her perfectly manicured face. "I have to take this," she muttered quickly, her sweet facade slipping for just a fraction of a second. "It is the contractor about the patio renovations. Eat your oatmeal, Richard. I will be right back to make sure you take your medicine." She spun around and hurried out of the room, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. In her haste, she failed to pull the heavy oak door completely shut. It remained open just a few inches, leaving a narrow vertical slice of the hallway visible. This was my window of opportunity. I threw off the blanket, ignoring the immediate sharp flare of agony in my sternum. I planted my bare feet firmly on the floor and forced myself to stand. My head spun for a moment, black spots dancing in my peripheral vision, but I pushed through the dizziness using sheer willpower. I moved toward the open door with silent, calculated steps. I peered through the crack, ensuring the hallway was empty. I could hear Monica pacing in the distant kitchen, her voice raised in a tense, hushed argument over the phone. I slipped through the gap, stepping out into the corridor. The cold floor chilled my bare feet, but I kept my breathing shallow and even. I bypassed the living room entirely, moving with the stealth of a man navigating a minefield. My target was the east wing of the house, specifically the large mahogany-paneled home office I had designed for myself when I originally purchased the property. It was the place where I managed my personal finances and kept my most sensitive corporate documents. If they were making a move against my assets, the evidence would start there. I reached the frosted glass doors of the office and gently pushed them open. The room smelled of old leather and lemon oil. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly normal. The shelves were neatly organized. The leather executive chair was pushed in, and the large Persian rug was vacuumed. But as I approached the massive cherrywood desk sitting in the center of the room, the illusion of normalcy rapidly disintegrated. I looked down at the brass mail sorting tray resting on the corner of the desk. It was completely empty. This was a glaring, undeniable anomaly. As the chief executive officer of a major commercial logistics firm, I received a steady daily influx of physical correspondence. My personal bank statements, corporate tax documents, investment portfolio updates, and confidential legal notices were always delivered directly to this house. The tray had been overflowing just 2 days ago before I checked into the hospital for my surgery. Now, the polished brass surface was bare, stripped of every single envelope. They had intercepted my mail. They were meticulously controlling the flow of information, ensuring I remained completely blind to any external notifications from my financial institutions. My pulse quickened, but I forced my hands to remain steady. I moved around the desk and crouched down, wincing as the staples in my chest pulled tight. I reached for the bottom right drawer. This was my secure drawer, the place where I kept my most vital personal tools. I gripped the brass handle and pulled. The drawer slid open smoothly. It was unlocked. I always, without exception, locked that drawer, and I kept the only key on the ring they had confiscated from my coat pocket yesterday. I stared into the open drawer. My spare checkbooks were still there. My old passports were neatly stacked in the corner, but the central compartment, usually occupied by a velvet-lined box, was glaringly empty. My heavy brass signature stamp was gone. I felt a cold chill radiate outward from my spine. That stamp was not a mere trinket. It was a legally binding instrument registered with my bank's and corporate board. It was authorized for use on major contracts, high-tier financial transfers, and executive directives when I was traveling overseas or physically unable to sign documents myself. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. The empty mail tray, the missing signature stamp, the late-night meeting in the dining room with the corporate liquidator, the piles of legal documents marked with sticky flags, the absurd lie about an insurance adjuster upgrading my post-operative care. It was all a carefully constructed smokescreen. They were not merely trying to isolate me or steal a few thousand from a checking account. They were actively hijacking my entire identity. They were using my official signature stamp to authorize massive irreversible transactions while I was locked in a bedroom completely cut off from the outside world. I heard the sharp click of a shoe striking the hardwood floor outside. Monica had finished her phone call. I silently closed the desk drawer. I slipped back down the hallway, barely returning to the bed before the heavy oak door swung open. I pulled the thick comforter up to my chin just as the heavy oak door swung open. Bradley walked in with an exaggerated softness, as if treading around a sleeping toddler instead of his recovering father. I kept my breathing slow and rhythmic, keeping my eyelids heavy and half shut. I needed to portray a helpless, medicated old man, completely unaware his empire was being stolen. Bradley approached the nightstand and picked up the small plastic cup Monica had left earlier. He held it out toward me with a gentle, artificial smile. "You need to take your medication, Dad," he said smoothly. "The doctor was specific about staying ahead of the pain and keeping your heart rhythm completely stable. We do not want any setbacks today." I reached out with a trembling hand, intentionally letting my fingers shake before accepting the plastic cup. I nodded weakly, murmuring a quiet word of thanks. Bradley stood over me, arms crossed, waiting for me to swallow the contents. I lifted the cup to my dry lips, tilting my head back. I tossed the pills into my mouth quickly, pushing them deep between my lower gums and cheek. I grabbed the orange juice, took a deliberate swallow, and let out a tired sigh. "There you go," Bradley said, his voice dripping with false satisfaction. "Just relax now. Monica and I are handling the insurance details, so you have absolutely nothing to worry about. We have everything under control." He turned around, walked out of the room, and closed the door. I heard the unmistakable metallic scrape of the deadbolt sliding into place once again. I waited for the sound of his footsteps to fade completely down the long hallway. When the house was quiet, I sat up and spat the wet pills into the palm of my hand. I wiped away the sticky juice and stared at the medication resting on my skin. My usual heart medication was a small, round, chalky white tablet. The pills sitting in the palm of my hand were entirely different. They were slightly larger oblong capsules encased in a hard transparent shell, filled with pale white powder and distinct bright blue speckles. I had never seen this medication in my life. The hospital pharmacy strictly instructed me to resume my normal prescriptions. Yet, my son was actively feeding me unidentified narcotics. I wiped my hand on a towel and swung my legs out of bed. I walked to the attached bathroom and locked the thick door securely behind me. I turned on the exhaust fan to mask any noise I might make. I opened my leather shaving kit, which had been transferred from my hospital bag. Hidden beneath a false bottom, nestled under my spare razor blades, was a prepaid burner phone. I purchased it 2 years ago during a vicious corporate espionage scandal at my logistics firm. A man in my position never relied on a single communication line. It was a basic rule of survival. And today, that simple rule was about to save my life. I powered on the small device. The bright screen illuminated the dim bathroom. It took 30 agonizing seconds to connect to the local cellular network. I opened the mobile web browser. My fingers moved with precision despite the burning pain radiating across my chest. I held the mysterious capsule up to the bright fluorescent light, squinting to read the tiny alphanumeric code printed on the plastic shell. I typed the imprint code, color, and exact shape directly into a secure medical pill database. I hit search. The results loaded instantly, and the warm blood drained completely from my face. The pill in my hand was not a blood thinner. It was not a beta blocker. It was not a painkiller meant to soothe a healing sternum. The pill in my hand was not a blood thinner. It was not a beta blocker. It was not a painkiller meant to soothe a healing sternum. It was a heavy black market tranquilizer. The medical description categorized it as a potent sedative, primarily used in severe psychiatric cases to suppress violent episodes. The listed side effects included extreme lethargy, profound confusion, slurred speech, and rapid severe memory loss. The medical warning explicitly stated that prolonged use, especially in elderly patients, would reliably mimic the advanced, debilitating symptoms of aggressive dementia. I stared at the glowing screen, my mind processing the sheer malice of their plan. They were not merely stealing my corporate assets or forging my signature. They were actively engaging in chemical warfare against my brain. They were deliberately poisoning me to systematically destroy my cognitive functions. If I had swallowed those pills over the week, I would have become an incoherent shell of a human being. I would not be able to remember my own name, let alone the complex financial structures of my logistics company. The picture was now terrifyingly complete. The locked door, the missing mail, the stolen brass signature stamp, the heavy sedatives masquerading as heart medication. Bradley and Monica were constructing a flawless, legally binding narrative. They were chemically inducing dementia to present me to a judge and formally declare me legally incompetent. Once stripped of my mental agency, Bradley would gain absolute control over my entire estate, company, and bank accounts. They would ship me off to a state-funded medical facility, abandoning me to rot in an isolated ward while spending my fortune. A violent tremor of rage ripped through my body. The physical agony of my wounds was nothing compared to the psychological torment of realizing my flesh and blood wanted to permanently erase my mind for financial profit. I sacrificed my youth, health, and marriage to build a financial fortress for my son. I gave him every advantage, luxury, and opportunity a father could possibly provide. His ultimate gratitude was a pill specifically designed to quietly and irreversibly destroy my functioning brain. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me was pale, battered, and physically broken. But beneath the bruised skin, the ruthless corporate predator was wide awake. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed my age and my illness made me a passive, defenseless victim. They had no idea I had spent 40 years crushing men far smarter and far more ruthless than a spoiled, greedy child playing pretend in a suit. I tossed the deadly capsules into the toilet bowl and pressed the flush handle. I watched the swirling water swallow the poison forever while carrying away the physical evidence of their treacherous plan. I dried my hands on a thick towel and slipped the burner phone back into the hidden compartment of my leather shaving kit. I walked back into the bedroom, moving with a renewed cold sense of purpose. I climbed back into the bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I closed my eyes and allowed my breathing to slow down to a steady, rhythmic pace. I would continue to play the part of the frail, medicated old man. I would let them believe they had one. I would give them more than enough rope to hang themselves completely and irrevocably. The silent war had officially begun. I lay still in the gathering shadows, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike back with devastating corporate force. The heavy oak door creaked open just a fraction of an inch, spilling a narrow beam of golden hallway light across the foot of my bed. I immediately let my jaw go slack and deepened my breathing into a slow, ragged rhythm. I needed to portray the complete physical surrender of a man whose mind was dissolving under the weight of heavy black market sedatives. Monica stepped quietly into the room. I could smell the sharp, expensive notes of her floral perfume cutting through the stagnant air. She stood at the edge of the mattress for what felt like an eternity, watching my chest rise and fall. I did not twitch a single muscle. I allowed a small string of saliva to pool at the corner of my mouth, fully committing to the pathetic illusion they needed to see. Finally, she let out a soft, satisfied sigh. "He is completely under," she whispered to someone out in the hallway. Bradley replied in a hushed, eager tone. "Good. Let us get to the brokerage firm before the afternoon traffic hits. We have a massive amount of paperwork to finalize with the liquidator today." The door clicked shut, followed by the familiar sickening scrape of the deadbolt sliding into place. I kept my eyes closed, listening intently as their hurried footsteps retreated down the long hardwood corridor. A few minutes later, the muffled hum of Bradley's luxury sports car engine vibrated through the floorboards, quickly fading down the long cobblestone driveway. The sprawling house fell into a profound, suffocating silence. I sat up, wiping the saliva from my chin with the back of my hand. The searing pain in my sternum flared brightly, a sharp reminder of my physical vulnerability, but my mind was operating with crystal clarity. I walked to the attached bathroom, my bare feet silent against the cold tiles. I retrieved my leather shaving kit from the marble counter and pulled out the small black burner phone hidden beneath the false bottom. I walked back into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the blank screen for a brief moment. I needed a weapon. In the world of high-stakes commercial logistics, the sharpest weapon you can wield is a ruthless, unforgiving corporate attorney. I dialed the direct private line of Gregory Mitchell. Gregory had been my lead counsel for nearly 30 years. We had fought side by side in the trenches of brutal industry acquisitions, fending off aggressive competitors and navigating endless legal minefields. He was a shark in a tailored suit, a man possessing a brilliant legal mind and an absolute absence of mercy for anyone who attempted to cross us. If there was one person on this earth I trusted to handle a coordinated betrayal of this magnitude, it was him. The private line rang twice before he answered. Mitchell speaking, his deep, gravelly voice echoed through the small speaker. "Gregory, it is Richard," I whispered, keeping my voice low and steady. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Richard," he said, his tone instantly shifting from professional detachment to genuine alarm. "Where are you calling from?" "I tried to reach your primary mobile device 3 times this morning. Bradley answered and told me you were heavily sedated and unable to take any calls. He said there had been a minor complication with your recovery." I replied smoothly, "I am calling from a burner phone, Gregory. I am currently locked inside the first-floor guest bedroom of my own estate. Bradley confiscated my wallet, my primary phone, and my keys. He and Monica are feeding me a heavy psychiatric tranquilizer disguised as my post-operative heart medication. They have stolen my official brass signature stamp from my home office desk." The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear the gears turning in Gregory's razor-sharp mind as he processed the sheer scale of the treachery. "Are you telling me your own son is holding you hostage and attempting to chemically induce cognitive failure?" Gregory asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous icy whisper. "That is exactly what I am telling you," I confirmed. "They had a corporate liquidator in my dining room yesterday evening. I saw them signing a mountain of documents while I was pretending to be asleep. They are staging a complete hostile takeover of Caldwell Logistics, and they are preparing to declare me legally incompetent so they can throw me into a state-funded care facility. I heard the rapid, aggressive clacking of a mechanical keyboard through the receiver. Gregory was already moving. "Give me exactly 3 minutes, Richard," he said, his tone shifting into pure tactical mode. "I am logging into the secure county and state legal databases right now. If Bradley is using your official signature stamp, he has to file the documents with the local authorities to make the asset transfers legally binding." I sat in the dim bedroom, gripping the small phone tightly against my ear. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. I listened to the frantic typing, the sound of a man desperately hunting for the digital footprints of my destruction. "Richard," Gregory finally said. His voice was heavy, drained of its usual booming confidence. The words he spoke next landed like physical blows. "What did you find?" I asked, bracing myself for the impact. "He submitted a full irrevocable power of attorney yesterday afternoon," Gregory explained, reading directly from his monitor. "The document grants Bradley total unrestricted executive control over your entire financial portfolio, your medical decisions, and your personal estate. It is completely notarized. He must have bribed a corrupt notary to verify your forged signature stamp." A wave of nausea washed over me. "He effectively owns my life," I whispered. "It gets worse, Richard," Gregory continued, the typing growing louder and more frantic. "He is actively initiating a hostile takeover of your logistics firm. He filed emergency executive orders this morning to transfer 60% of the company's liquid operating funds into an obscure offshore shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." My chest tightened painfully. "And the house?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The house I bought for them." Gregory paused. I heard him swallow hard. "He put the house on the market this morning at a significantly reduced price for a fast cash sale. Richard, they are planning to take the offshore money, take the cash from the house sale, and completely disappear. Once the assets are moved, you will have absolutely nothing left. You will be a ward of the state." "Gregory," I said, the shock quickly burning away, leaving behind a cold, unyielding inferno of pure vengeance. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I am here, Richard," he replied, his voice hardening with shared anger. "Tell me what we do." I instructed him, "We are not going to simply report this to the police. We are going to build a trap so devastating they will never recover." I held the small burner phone tightly against my ear. "Gregory, I need you to initiate a massive counteroffensive," I whispered, making sure my voice did not carry beyond the locked bedroom door. "You must do it completely in the shadows. Bradley and Monica cannot suspect a single thing until the steel trap snaps shut on their ankles. If they sense we are onto them, they will liquidate the offshore accounts and vanish before we can freeze the transfers." Gregory understood immediately. His tone shifted into the ruthless analytical register that had made him the most feared corporate litigator in the city. "We will choke their financial oxygen supply without them even noticing, Richard," he promised. "But I need eyes inside that house to intercept their internal communications and secure the physical evidence of the shell corporations. I will handle the logistics. Just play the part of the dying king a little longer." We disconnected the call. I wiped the device clean, buried it back beneath the false bottom of my leather shaving kit, and returned to my bed. The following morning, the oppressive silence of the house was shattered by the sharp ring of the front doorbell. I lay in my bed, maintaining my manufactured state of heavy sedation, listening as Monica's frantic footsteps clicked across the foyer. I heard the heavy front door open, followed by the sound of a woman speaking in a crisp, professional tone. "Good morning. I am Nurse Rachel Winters," the voice announced, projecting just enough volume to carry down the hallway. "I have been dispatched by the primary cardiac care unit to monitor Mr. Caldwell. We received an automated alert regarding severe irregularities in his post-operative heart rhythm, and the hospital mandates specialized home monitoring to prevent a catastrophic infarction." Monica stumbled over her words, her manipulative charm faltering under the sudden intrusion. I could easily picture her hands fluttering in panic. "Oh, there must be some administrative mistake," Monica stammered, her voice pitched unnaturally high. "My father-in-law is resting comfortably. My husband and I are managing his medication perfectly. We do not require external medical assistance today. We already have everything handled." Nurse Rachel did not yield a single inch. Her response was a masterpiece of manufactured medical authority. "I am afraid this is not a matter of preference, ma'am," Rachel stated firmly, the sound of her heavy medical bag hitting the floor echoing like a gavel. "The liability protocols for major open heart surgery are non-negotiable. If you refuse me entry to assess his vital signs right now, I am legally obligated to dispatch a paramedic team to forcibly transport him back to the intensive care ward." The threat of an ambulance arriving with flashing lights and drawing the attention of the affluent neighborhood was the last thing Monica wanted. It would shatter the controlled environment they desperately needed to execute their illegal asset liquidation. "Fine," Monica snapped, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "But please make it quick. He needs his isolation." I heard the heavy door close, followed by the sound of 2 sets of footsteps approaching my room. The deadbolt scraped open. Monica ushered the woman into the dim bedroom, standing cross-armed in the doorway like a prison guard. Rachel walked directly to my bedside. She was a sharply dressed woman in immaculate scrubs, her eyes intensely focused and intelligent. She possessed the unmistakable aura of a top-tier forensic auditor who was entirely accustomed to dismantling complex corporate frauds cleverly disguised today beneath a stethoscope. She pulled a digital blood pressure cuff from her bag and wrapped it securely around my upper bicep. As the machine began to hum and inflate, tightening around my arm with mechanical precision, Rachel leaned in close. Her face was mere inches from mine, blocking Monica's line of sight from the doorway. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to remain perfectly still while the machine takes a reading," she instructed loudly for Monica's benefit. Simultaneously, her gloved hand slipped beneath my pillow. I felt the cold edge of a metallic object slide against the cotton sheets. It was a high-capacity USB drive. While the blood pressure monitor beeped rhythmically, Rachel leaned her head down, pretending to inspect my surgical incisions. She lowered her voice to a breathy, almost imperceptible whisper that only I could hear over the steady mechanical hum. "Gregory sent me," she breathed softly into my ear. "The drive under your pillow contains the preliminary forensic audit. Bradley has been bleeding the company dry for 6 long months. He set up an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands under a generic maritime logistics banner. He has been systematically siphoning our central operating funds through a labyrinth of fake vendor invoices and phantom equipment leases. The total stolen so far is well over $8 million, Richard. He is trying to drain the final remaining liquidity today before the weekend banking freeze." My heart slammed painfully against my ribs, an involuntary surge of pure fury that had absolutely nothing to do with my medical condition. I kept my eyes closed, nodding faintly to show I understood the gravity of her words. We are systematically locking him out of the main corporate servers as we speak, Rachel continued in a rapid whisper, her fingers expertly adjusting the medical tubing on my arm to maintain her clinical facade. Gregory is filing the emergency injunctions under a sealed court order. Bradley thinks he is transferring the funds into an untraceable international account, but we have intercepted the digital routing numbers. Every single dollar he attempts to wire today will be automatically diverted into an escrow holding tank controlled exclusively by Gregory. We are letting him commit the fraud so we can definitively capture his digital fingerprints on the illegal transactions. Your son has built his own financial coffin, Richard. You just need to hold the line here. Rachel stood up straight, peeling the Velcro cuff from my arm with a loud sound that echoed in the quiet room. His vitals are remarkably stable considering the trauma of his surgery, she announced, clearly addressing Monica, who was hovering suspiciously in the doorway. He requires continued rest. I will transmit these readings directly to his primary cardiologist. Monica let out a long sigh of relief, though her eyes remained narrowed. Thank you, Nurse Winters, she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. As you can see, we are taking excellent care of him. We can handle his recovery. Rachel packed her equipment into her canvas bag with efficient movements. She offered me one last glance of solidarity before following my treacherous daughter-in-law out of the room. The deadbolt slid back into place, locking me in the darkness once more. I reached beneath the pillow, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal of the flash drive. It was the physical proof of my son's ultimate betrayal, the undeniable evidence of his greed. I clutched the device against my chest, staring up at the shadowed ceiling. Bradley believed he was playing a master game of corporate chess, but he had forgotten who taught him the rules. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the bedroom walls, eventually giving way to the cold, absolute darkness of the evening. I remained on the mattress, perfectly still, letting the silence of the locked room sharpen my focus. Rachel had given me the definitive proof of the financial theft, but Gregory and I needed more. We needed real-time tactical intelligence to anticipate their final moves before the banks opened on Monday morning. Fortunately, Rachel had slipped one additional item into my palm when she checked my pulse. It was a micro-audio transmitter, barely the size of a small coin, backed with industrial adhesive. It was a sophisticated piece of corporate espionage hardware designed to pick up whispers from across a crowded room. Now I needed to place it directly in the center of their command post. The dining room. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. It was time to put on the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump forward, rounding my spine to mimic the defeated posture of a man rapidly losing his grip on reality. I forced my eyes to remain half open, dulling my gaze into a vacant, uncomprehending stare. I shuffled my feet across the hardwood floor, intentionally dragging my heels to create a clumsy, irregular rhythm. I reached out for the door handle, praying they had forgotten to secure the deadbolt after Rachel departed. I turned the brass knob, and to my immense relief, the latch clicked open. Monica must have been too frustrated by the unexpected medical visit to remember the lock. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stumbled out into the brightly lit hallway. The ambient light of the corridor burned my eyes, but I maintained my blank, vacant expression. I shuffled forward, dragging my right foot heavily, allowing my shoulder to scrape against the expensive silk wallpaper. Every step was a calculated display of profound cognitive decline. I let out a low, confused moan, a pathetic sound meant to broadcast my supposed mental deterioration. The murmur of voices grew louder as I approached the grand dining room. Bradley and Monica were seated at the long mahogany table, surrounded by glowing laptop screens, printed spreadsheets, and half-empty glasses of red wine. They were deeply engrossed in the mechanics of their theft, completely unaware of the ghost haunting their hallway. I paused in the arched doorway, swaying unsteadily on my feet. I let my jaw drop open, staring blankly at the crystal chandelier hanging above their heads. Bradley was the first to notice my presence. He froze mid-sentence, his hand hovering over his computer keyboard. His eyes widened in genuine shock, quickly replaced by a flash of intense irritation. "Dad," he snapped, his voice sharp and devoid of any fake affection. "What are you doing out of bed? You are supposed to be sleeping." Monica gasped instinctively, pulling a stack of financial documents toward her chest. She glared at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered into her pristine home. "He looks terrible," she whispered harshly to Bradley. "Those new pills must be hitting him hard." I did not respond to their questions. I simply blinked slowly, projecting total confusion, and took 2 clumsy, unsteady steps into the dining room. I raised a trembling hand, pointing vaguely toward the far wall as if chasing a hallucination. "Water," I mumbled, slurring the single word until it was almost unintelligible. "I am so thirsty." Bradley pushed his chair back with a loud, aggressive scrape against the hardwood floor. He marched toward me, his face tight with anger. "I told you to stay in your room," he hissed, grabbing me roughly by the upper arm. His grip was entirely devoid of care, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. This was the moment I allowed my knees to buckle completely, surrendering all physical tension in my body. I collapsed toward the floor like a sack of dead weight, dragging Bradley down with me. He cursed loudly, struggling to support my sudden drop. I hit the edge of the plush Persian rug, my shoulders slamming against the base of the massive mahogany dining table. "Jesus Christ," Bradley shouted, straining to pull me back to my feet. "Help me get him up, Monica." While Bradley was fully distracted by the physical effort of lifting my dead weight, I extended my right hand. The micro-transmitter was already pressed between my thumb and forefinger. I reached upward, sliding my hand blindly underneath the thick edge of the mahogany table. My knuckles brushed against the smooth, polished wood until I found the inner support beam. I pressed the small device firmly against the surface, ensuring the industrial adhesive locked it permanently into place. The entire maneuver took less than 3 seconds. It was a flawless, invisible execution. Monica rushed over, grabbing my other arm. "You are too heavy, Richard," she complained bitterly, her manicured nails digging into my flesh. "Stand up and walk. We cannot carry you all the way down the hall." I let out another pathetic groan, allowing them to haul me upward. I kept my head down, dragging my feet as they practically dragged me out of the dining room and back down the long corridor. Their frustration was palpable. They were rough, impatient, and entirely merciless. "This is ridiculous," Bradley muttered, his breathing heavy from the exertion. "We need to increase the dosage tomorrow. He is still too mobile. He might wander out the front door and cause a scene in front of the neighbors." Monica agreed instantly. "I will double the capsules in the morning," she panted. "We just need him to stay completely docile until the offshore wires clear the holding accounts. We cannot risk any sudden moments of clarity." They shoved me unceremoniously through the door of the guest bedroom. I collapsed onto the mattress, bouncing slightly on the heavy springs. Bradley did not bother to pull the comforter over my legs or check my bandages. He simply turned his back on me and walked out. Monica followed close behind, pulling the door shut with a solid, definitive thud. The deadbolt scraped loudly, sealing me inside the dark room once more. The second the lock clicked into place, my frail, confused persona vanished entirely. I sat up straight. My breathing perfectly controlled, my mind racing with cold, sharp anticipation. I reached into the pocket of my trousers and pulled out the tiny flesh-colored wireless earpiece Rachel had included with the transmitter. I placed the small receiver carefully into my left ear and tapped the side to activate the hidden wireless connection. The device emitted a very low, soft chime confirming it was actively paired with the bug hidden beneath the table. A fraction of a second later, the digital audio feed came alive, flooding my ear with the crisp, crystal-clear sound of my son plotting my ultimate financial demise. The audio was so exceptionally sharp, I could hear the faint, rhythmic clinking of ice swirling inside their crystal bourbon glasses. Every single treacherous, greedy syllable they spoke would now be captured for my final revenge. The crisp audio feed from the micro-transmitter delivered the reality of my destruction with terrifying clarity. I lay motionless on the mattress in the darkened guest room, pressing the small earpiece deeper into my ear canal. I could hear the heavy splash of liquid pouring over ice, followed by the soft clink of crystal glasses meeting in a celebratory toast. Then a third voice cut through the ambient noise. It was the man from yesterday evening, the one Monica had smoothly introduced as an independent insurance adjuster. His tone was entirely different now. It was the sharp, clipped voice of a professional corporate liquidator dealing in high-stakes illegal asset transfers. "Everything is proceeding exactly according to our established timeline," the liquidator said. "The preliminary wire transfers have bypassed the secondary security protocols thanks to the heavy signature authorizations you provided this morning. I just need your verbal confirmation, Bradley, before I initiate the final sequence that drains the domestic operating accounts." I heard Bradley let out a long, satisfied sigh. "Do it," my son replied, his voice brimming with arrogant confidence. "Drain every single cent from the logistics firm. We want the domestic accounts completely zeroed out by tomorrow afternoon. Route the entire sum through the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation exactly as we discussed. I want the money sitting safely in our untraceable offshore holding tank before the weekend banking freeze goes into effect." "Consider it done," the liquidator confirmed, followed by the rapid tapping of fingers against a laptop keyboard. "The corporate assets are practically secured. Now we need to finalize the real estate liquidation. We received a full cash offer on this estate 3 hours ago. $3 million, no contingencies, 30-day close. However, the title company requires the finalized power of attorney documents to process the deed transfer without your father being physically present." Monica laughed. It was a sharp, grating sound that sent a spike of pure, unfiltered ice straight into my veins. "Do not worry about the old man," Monica said smoothly. "We filed the absolute power of attorney yesterday afternoon. The corrupt notary stamped it without asking a single question. As far as the state is concerned, Bradley now holds total legal domain over Richard Caldwell and his entire estate. The house is officially yours to sell, darling." "Excellent work, Monica," the liquidator replied. "But I must advise extreme caution regarding his physical presence. The buyers will want to conduct a final walkthrough of the property next week. The title company will immediately freeze the transaction if they suspect foul play, elder abuse, or coercion. We need him completely out of the picture before the final closing documents are signed." I held my breath, waiting for my son to respond. I needed to hear the exact depths of his betrayal directly from his own mouth. I needed to know what my own flesh and blood had planned for the man who had provided him with every imaginable luxury. Bradley took a slow sip of his bourbon. "You do not need to worry about my father making a scene," Bradley said, his voice dropping into a chilling, casual register. "The old man is completely neutralized. His brain is absolute mush from the pills Monica has been feeding him. He barely knows what day it is, let alone how to operate a telephone or call a lawyer. He is just a drooling, confused mess taking up space in the guest room." "So what is the permanent solution?" the liquidator asked. "By Friday, the company assets are transferred to the shell account and the house closes for the $3 million in cash," Bradley stated, laying out the endgame with sociopathic precision. "The moment the funds are secured offshore, we ship him to a state-run nursing facility in Oregon. We found a place that specializes in severe advanced dementia patients. It is a miserable, underfunded warehouse for the forgotten elderly. They do not allow unsupervised phone calls, and they certainly do not listen to the ramblings of patients claiming to be stolen billionaires. We will drop him off, sign the admission papers using the power of attorney, and disappear to the Caribbean before the facility even realizes the admission checks are going to bounce. He will rot there for the rest of his pathetic life, and no one will ever care." "That is a brilliantly effective strategy," the liquidator finally agreed. "Clean, efficient, and highly profitable. I will finalize the wire transfers now. Let us prepare the closing documents for the estate." I reached up with a trembling hand and pulled the earpiece from my ear, breaking the audio connection. The room was instantly plunged back into the profound, oppressive silence of the locked guest bedroom. I lay on the mattress in the darkness, staring blindly at the ceiling. I felt a profound, fundamental shift occurring deep inside my chest. It was the painful, irreversible death of my paternal love. For decades I had viewed Bradley through the forgiving, protective lens of a father. I had excused his arrogance, subsidized his failures, and desperately tried to mold him into a capable, honorable man. I had loved him with unconditional devotion. But the man sitting in the dining room, casually plotting to poison my brain and abandon me in a squalid state facility, was not my son. He was a ruthless, remorseless predator who had attached himself to my life to drain my resources and discard my carcass when I was no longer useful. The profound sorrow that gripped my heart over the past 2 days evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly calm resolve. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. I stopped being a heartbroken father mourning the betrayal of his child. I became Richard Caldwell, the chief executive officer, the founder, the apex predator of the commercial logistics industry. I had spent 40 years navigating treacherous corporate waters, dismantling hostile takeovers, and destroying aggressive competitors. I knew how to build traps. I knew how to leverage information. Bradley and Monica believed they were playing a sophisticated game of financial chess, but they were amateurs stumbling blindly into a war zone. They wanted to steal my company, my house, and my mind. They had severely underestimated the man they were attempting to bury. I certainly would not let 2 greedy children strip me of my dignity without facing devastating consequences. I sat up on the edge of the bed, ignoring the throbbing pain in my chest. I reached into the hidden compartment of my shaving kit and retrieved the black burner phone. It was time to coordinate the counterstrike. I was going to let Bradley authorize the offshore wire transfers. I was going to let him believe he had successfully liquidated the estate. I would give them the illusion of absolute victory right up until the very last second. and then I was going to pull the floor out from under them. I was going to systematically dismantle their lives with the exact same ruthless precision they had applied to mine. They wanted a war for the Caldwell Empire. I was going to give them a massacre. I spent the day confined to the guest bedroom, conserving my energy and rehearsing the final act of my physical surrender. At 7 p.m. on Thursday night, the scrape of the deadbolt broke the silence. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing Bradley and Monica in the bright light. Bradley held a thick stack of freshly printed documents. His face was tense, his jaw clenched with anticipation and energy. Monica stood behind him, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression devoid of warmth. It was time for the final push. They needed my signature to bridge the gap between their forged digital authorizations and the closing documents required by the title company and liquidator. "Dad, we need you in the dining room for a few minutes," Bradley said. His voice was clipped. "There are some final insurance papers you need to sign. It will only take a moment." I did not respond. I allowed my eyes to wander, letting my lower lip tremble. I let out a soft whimper, clutching the comforter with shaking fingers. Monica sighed loudly, rolling her eyes in disgust. "Just get him up, Bradley," she snapped. "We do not have all night. The liquidator is waiting for the copies." Bradley stepped into the room, grabbed me, and hauled me to my feet. A bolt of pain radiated through my sternum, but I used the agony to fuel my performance. I let my knees buckle, leaning my weight against his side. I dragged my feet, shuffling pitifully down the corridor toward the dining room. The mahogany dining table was cleared of everything except a stack of papers and a desk lamp. Bradley shoved me into a heavy wooden chair. He slapped the stack of documents down in front of me. "This is a standard medical proxy and a few final estate management forms," he lied smoothly. "The doctors need this to finalize your plan. Just sign at the bottom of each page where I have placed the yellow flags." He pushed a gold pen across the wood toward my hand. I looked down at the documents. Even with my vision blurred, I could clearly read the headers. Irrevocable transfer of assets, comprehensive power of attorney, deed of trust, relinquishment. It was the complete surrender of my empire. I slowly raised my hands, letting them shake. My fingers hovered over the pen, but I refused to pick it up. "No," I whispered, my voice cracking with terror. "I do not understand. My head is so foggy." Bradley slammed his fist down onto the table, causing the chandelier to rattle. "Sign the damn papers, Dad," he shouted, his mask slipping. "You are signing them right now." I flinched dramatically, pulling my arms back against my chest and letting tears spill over my cheeks. I reached into the breast pocket of my wrinkled pajama shirt. "I cannot use that pen," I sobbed weakly, my voice a pathetic, trembling rasp. "I have to use my own. It is my lucky pen. Your mother gave it to me. I cannot sign anything without your mother's pen." I pulled a sleek, matte black fountain pen from my pocket, clutching it tightly against my chest. Monica let out a sharp, exasperated groan. "For the love of God, Bradley, just let the old fool use his ridiculous pen," she hissed from the doorway. "Who cares what he uses as long as the ink hits the paper? Just get the signatures so we can scan the files and be done with this miserable charade." Bradley gritted his teeth, his face flushed with anger. "Fine," he spat, pointing a rigid finger at the signature lines. "Use your pen. Just sign where the yellow flags are." I uncapped the matte black fountain pen with trembling, uncoordinated movements. I leaned heavily over the table, bringing my face mere inches from the paper, as if I could barely see the lines. I pressed the nib to the crisp white parchment. I let my hand shake, allowing the signature to appear jagged, uneven, and utterly desperate. It was the signature of a man whose mind was completely fractured. I moved agonizingly slowly from page to page. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the scratching of the nib and the ragged sound of my feigned sobbing. With every stroke, I could feel Bradley hovering over my shoulder, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. I signed the transfer of my logistics firm. I signed the deed relinquishment for the estate. I signed the absolute medical proxy that would allow him to lock me away in a dementia ward. The moment the nib lifted from the final page, Bradley lunged forward. He snatched the stack of documents out from under my trembling hands. He held the papers up to the light, scanning the jagged blue ink signatures with a wide, victorious smirk spreading across his face. "It is done," he whispered, looking up at Monica with pure greed. "We have everything. We officially own it all." Monica smiled, a cold gleam in her eyes. "Take him back to his room," she commanded. "I will scan these to the liquidator immediately." Bradley grabbed me by the collar and hauled me up from the chair. He marched me back down the hallway with aggressive steps, no longer bothering to maintain any illusion of gentle care. He shoved me into the guest bedroom, letting me stumble and fall onto the mattress. "Sleep well, Dad," he sneered from the doorway. "You are going to have a very long, very quiet retirement." The heavy door slammed tightly shut and the deadbolt locked with a final echoing crash. I lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling in the pitch-black room. The tears on my cheeks dried instantly, and the violent trembling in my hands ceased. A cold, hard smile slowly formed on my face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the matte black fountain pen, turning it over in my fingers. Bradley and Monica believed they had just successfully executed the perfect corporate heist. They believed they held the legal keys to my entire kingdom, but they knew absolutely nothing about the specialized high-security protocols I had developed during my decades in international logistics. During the early 2000s, my firm had secured a highly classified government contract, transporting sensitive intellectual property across contested borders. To prevent corporate espionage, our engineers had developed a highly specialized thermal reactive ink formula. It flowed onto the paper smooth and bright, indistinguishable from standard high-grade fountain pen ink. But it was chemically designed to be entirely unstable when exposed to normal room temperature and ambient humidity. Within exactly 12 hours of application, the chemical bonds would break down and the ink would completely evaporate from the paper, leaving behind absolutely nothing but blank pages. Bradley could scan those documents tonight, but the digital copies were legally useless without the physical originals. By tomorrow morning, when he proudly presented those hard copies to the title company and the corporate liquidator, he would be handing them a stack of blank paper. He had inadvertently signed his own arrest warrant. The trap was now fully closed. Friday morning broke with a crisp brilliance. I lay awake before sunlight pierced the curtains, my mind sharp. The large house above me stirred early. Footsteps and running water indicated they were preparing for their momentous day. Monica's heels clicked sharply across the foyer. Bradley spoke loudly on his phone, his voice vibrating with greed. He confirmed wire protocols with the offshore bank and verified the meeting with the title company. They were dressing for a coronation, fully believing they had successfully stolen my entire kingdom. At precisely 8 a.m., the heavy oak door to my guest room scraped open. I immediately slipped back into my pathetic role, letting my mouth hang slightly open, and my breathing turned shallow and raspy. Bradley stepped into the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that I had undoubtedly paid for. Monica stood right behind him, wrapped in a sleek designer dress, radiating malicious triumph. They brought no breakfast. They merely stood at the foot of my bed, looking down at me like discarded furniture waiting for the dump. "Goodbye, Dad," Bradley said, his voice devoid of warmth. "We have important errands this morning. Do not wait up." Monica let out a venomous chuckle, strutting down the hallway. Bradley followed her. He pulled the door shut with a resounding thud. The deadbolt sliding into the doorframe echoed with heavy finality. Moments later, his sports car engine roared. Moments later, his sports car engine roared in the driveway, rapidly fading into the distance. The profound silence of the empty estate settled around me. I waited 10 minutes to ensure they had not returned. When I was absolutely certain I was alone, I threw off the comforter. The pain in my sternum flared instantly, but I welcomed it. It was a grounding physical reminder of the brutal reality I was navigating. I walked over to the locked oak door and knelt before the brass handle. Bradley had arrogantly installed a basic commercial deadbolt on a standard interior door. It was a sloppy amateur mistake. I reached back into the hidden compartment of my leather shaving kit and pulled out a small, sturdy set of steel lockpicks I had carried during my early days inspecting overseas freight yards. I slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applying a steady rotational pressure with my left thumb. I inserted the rake pick and gently manipulated the internal brass pins, feeling for the distinct click of the binding mechanism. My hands, which had trembled so convincingly just a few hours ago, were now perfectly steady and ruthlessly precise. Within 40 seconds, the final pin snapped into alignment. I turned the tension wrench and the deadbolt retracted with a smooth, satisfying click. I stood up, turned the brass knob, and pushed the door wide open. I stepped out of my confinement and into the sunlit corridor, a free man in my own home. I walked directly into the master suite bathroom, stripping off the wrinkled, sweat-stained pajamas that had served as my costume of defeat. I turned the shower handle, letting the water run scalding hot. I stood under the heavy spray, ignoring the sting against my healing surgical wounds. I let the hot water wash away the smell of the hospital, the scent of artificial weakness, and the lingering residue of Monica's cloying floral perfume. I washed away the frail, helpless old man who had allowed his son to walk all over him. When I stepped out of the glass enclosure, the mirror was thick with steam. I wiped it away with a towel and stared at my reflection. The bruised, pale victim was gone. I applied a generous layer of shaving cream and took a fresh straight razor to my face. I moved the blade with practiced, methodical strokes, scraping away the gray stubble that had made me look so pathetic and vulnerable. Every stroke of the razor felt like a shedding of dead skin. I rinsed my face with freezing cold water, the sudden temperature shock awakening every nerve ending in my body. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and bypassed the casual recovery clothes entirely. I reached past the soft sweaters and sweatpants, extending my hand toward the back of the wardrobe. I pulled out my sharpest, most intimidating garment. It was a bespoke charcoal gray tailored suit cut from pure Italian wool. It was the exact suit I wore when negotiating high-stakes international mergers or terminating toxic board members. It was my armor. I pulled on a crisp, starched white shirt, buttoning it with steady, deliberate fingers. I fastened a deep crimson silk tie around my neck, adjusting the knot until it was perfectly symmetrical. I slipped my arms into the charcoal jacket, feeling the familiar empowering weight of the tailored wool settle across my shoulders. I stepped into a pair of polished black leather Oxford shoes, lacing them tight. I walked back over to the full-length mirror and examined the final result. The transformation was absolute and terrifying. The hunched, trembling invalid who had wept over a fountain pen last night was completely dead. Richard Caldwell, the undisputed chief executive officer of a logistics empire, had officially returned. I looked formidable, dangerous, and entirely devoid of mercy. My physical scars were hidden beneath layers of expensive wool, and my mind was a sharpened steel blade, ready to cut through their entire web of lies. I retrieved the black burner phone from the bathroom counter and dialed a highly secure unlisted number. The line rang only once before it was answered. The voice on the other end was deep, professional, and rigidly disciplined. "Marcus speaking," my private driver said. Marcus had been my personal head of security and primary driver for nearly 15 years. He was a former military operative who asked zero questions and executed every command with absolute unflinching precision. "Marcus," I said, my voice projecting a commanding, resonant authority that I had suppressed for days. "I need the armored executive town car at the front entrance of the estate in exactly 20 minutes. We are going to the downtown financial district." There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the immediate sound of keys jingling. "I was informed you were strictly bedridden for the next 2 weeks, sir," Marcus noted, his tone betraying a hint of professional surprise. "The situation has drastically changed, Marcus," I replied smoothly. "My recovery has been miraculously accelerated. We have a hostile corporate takeover to dismantle and a pair of arrogant thieves to completely destroy before the lunch hour. I will be out front in exactly 20 minutes, sir," Marcus confirmed, disconnecting the call. I slipped the burner phone into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I walked out of the master suite and strode down the long hallway, my leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors with heavy, authoritative purpose. The sun was streaming through the massive bay windows, illuminating the sprawling estate that Bradley had so foolishly thought he could steal from under my nose. I walked toward the heavy oak front door, ready to march into the corporate boardroom and unleash absolute hell upon my own son. The heavy tires of the armored town car glided to a smooth halt in front of the towering glass and steel monolith that housed the premier corporate liquidation firm in the city. Marcus stepped out instantly, his posture rigidly professional, and opened the rear door for me. I stepped onto the sunlit pavement, feeling the crisp morning air fill my lungs. The sharp, restrictive pain in my chest was still there, but it was entirely eclipsed by the pure, concentrated adrenaline pumping through my veins. I walked through the revolving glass doors and into the expansive marble lobby. Gregory Mitchell and Rachel Winters were already waiting for me near the private elevators. Gregory looked like a seasoned general preparing to accept an unconditional surrender. He wore a dark, immaculate suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase that held the digital keys to Bradley's destruction. Rachel stood beside him, holding a sleek silver tablet, her eyes sharp and predatory. "You look remarkably well for a man who was supposed to be heavily sedated and legally incompetent," Gregory noted, a dry, dangerous smile curving the corners of his mouth. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored charcoal jacket. "I am feeling incredibly refreshed, Gregory," I replied, my voice steady and resonant. "Are the digital nets in place?" Rachel tapped the screen of her tablet, bringing up a complex array of scrolling data streams. "The offshore holding accounts have been entirely intercepted and rerouted," she confirmed. Every single dollar Bradley attempts to wire this morning will drop directly into our secure locked escrow vault. He is completely surrounded. We stepped into the elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut, sealing us inside. The rapid ascent to the 42nd floor felt like the agonizing climb to the top of a massive precipice. The doors chimed open, revealing a plush, quiet reception area heavily decorated with modern art and frosted glass partitions. I led the way, my leather shoes sinking silently into the thick carpeting. Down the wide corridor at the very end of the hall was the primary executive boardroom. The front wall was constructed entirely of soundproof floor-to-ceiling glass. Through the transparent barrier, the scene unfolded like a silent tragic play. Bradley and Monica sat on one side of a massive polished granite table. The liquidator, a sharp-looking man in a pale gray suit, sat opposite them, gesturing toward an open laptop screen. A stack of manila folders rested between them. Bradley leaned forward, his face flushed with greedy anticipation. He was holding a heavy gold pen, hovering it right above the final authorization pad. He was literally seconds away from transferring $20 million of my life's work into what he foolishly believed was his untraceable offshore account. Monica watched his hand with unblinking predatory focus. I did not knock. I placed both of my hands flat against the heavy double glass doors and shoved them open with a violent, explosive force. The thick glass panels slammed against the metal stoppers with a sound like a gunshot, shattering the quiet professionalism of the boardroom. The liquidator jumped in his expensive leather chair. Monica gasped loudly, her manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth. Bradley froze completely, his gold pen hovering in the air. He slowly turned his head toward the entrance. The color drained from his face so rapidly he looked as though he had been physically struck. His confident smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He stared at my immaculate charcoal suit, my freshly shaven face, and the cold, unyielding fire in my eyes. The silence in the room was absolute, thick, and suffocating. The physical scars on my chest have healed into a dull, fading ache, but the psychological rebirth is absolute. I am no longer the frail, sedated victim they tried to discard. I am sharp, focused, and operating with a clarity I have not possessed in decades. My first order of business was completely purging my personal life of their lingering poison. I listed the sprawling estate on the open market, and it sold in just 4 days for over $4 million. I left the suburban quiet behind and purchased a highly secure modern luxury penthouse in the very center of the financial district. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a commanding view of the city skyline, a daily visual reminder of the empire I built and the sheer willpower it took to reclaim it. But rebuilding my physical environment was only the foundational step. The true restoration of my legacy required fixing the deepest, most painful fracture in my family. I had to reach out to my estranged daughter, Natalie. For 5 long years, I had barely spoken to her. Bradley had meticulously orchestrated our separation, feeding me lies about her character and intercepting her attempts to contact me. He convinced me that he was the only loyal child I had left. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and I had foolishly swallowed every single word. I asked Gregory Mitchell to track her down. He found her working as a senior logistics director for a respected maritime shipping firm in Seattle. She had built her own successful career entirely from scratch, relying on the very same fierce work ethic and sharp intellect she inherited from me. I flew to Seattle and waited for her in the lobby of her office building. When she walked out of the elevator, she stopped dead in her tracks. The anger and hurt in her eyes were profound. But the moment she saw the genuine, unvarnished regret on my face, the walls between us began to crumble. We sat in a quiet coffee shop for 4 hours clearing the toxic air that Bradley had maliciously manufactured. I laid out the entire truth, detailing the sedatives, the offshore shell accounts, the fake liquidator, and the intricate trap I had built to capture her brother. She listened in stunned silence, her tears falling freely as she realized the sheer depth of his sociopathic greed. I apologized for my blindness, for letting my grief cloud my judgment. Natalie did not demand grand gestures or immediate financial compensation. She simply reached across the small wooden table and held my hand. That single forgiving touch healed emotional wounds I did not even know I carried. Yesterday morning, I officially appointed Natalie as the new Chief Operating Officer of Caldwell Logistics. She stepped into the boardroom with a commanding presence, completely untainted by arrogance or entitlement. She possesses the brilliant, highly analytical mind required to navigate complex international trade, combined with a profound sense of moral integrity that Bradley never understood. The company is already stronger than ever before. The toxic elements have been permanently excised, and the loyal employees have rallied enthusiastically behind her dynamic leadership. Bradley and Monica are currently sitting in federal holding cells, facing decades in maximum security prison. Their bank assets are completely frozen, and their societal reputations are entirely destroyed. They tried to steal my massive empire by plunging me into the dark, sedated depths of my own home. Instead, they forced me to wake up, strike back with devastating force, and bring the true rightful heir back into the light. I walked through the glass corridors of my company headquarters today, listening to the rhythmic hum of global commerce, feeling an overwhelming sense of restored purpose. I watched Natalie conduct executive briefings through the same transparent walls where I once orchestrated my son's ultimate downfall. She speaks with clear, decisive authority, commanding the absolute respect of every seasoned vice president in the room. There is no deceit in her posture, no hidden agenda behind her professional smile. She represents the absolute best parts of my legacy. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the polished granite surfaces of the boardroom table. The man looking back at me is no longer a trusting, naive father blinded by unconditional affection. He is a survivor. He is a warrior who walked through the valley of betrayal and emerged with a sword in his hand. The pain of realizing my son was a monster will always remain a quiet, dull ache deep in my chest. However, that sorrow is constantly eclipsed by the immense pride I feel watching my daughter effortlessly command the empire she was always destined to rule. The storm has finally passed, leaving behind a perfectly cleansed foundation. I gaze out over the bustling metropolis below, knowing that true strength requires the ultimate sacrifice. Blood does not grant absolute immunity, nor does it excuse unbridled greed. My son learned the brutal reality of my resolve, and he will spend his entire life paying the terrible price. Caldwell Logistics will thrive under Natalie, and I will spend my remaining years guiding her brilliant ascent. The empire stands unbroken. The king has reclaimed his crown. Let this be a lasting testament to the price of betrayal. I have won. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and age should never be mistaken for weakness. When I lay in that hospital bed, I realized that the people you sacrifice the most for are often the ones who will sell you out the fastest when they think you have absolutely nothing left to offer. Do not let parental guilt blind you to cold, hard facts. You must verify trust, secure your assets, and never hesitate to cut out the rot, even if it shares your last name. Real family protects you in your darkest hour. They do not use it to bury you. Have you ever been deeply betrayed by someone you sacrificed everything for? How did you take your power back? Drop your story in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of surviving, outsmarting, and rebuilding against all odds.